Now, this specific field right here is new to Dynamics AX7 and higher. They call it Localized Functionality Region. By default, in a previous version of Dynamics AX, this was always the case. That means localization features of each country would have been detected by the country code. And what do they mean? Certain countries, they have their own tax codes, such as India, Russia. Brazil have also fiscal document and fiscal printer requirements. There are certain reports, certain fields that needs to be available, certain things should not be available. So all of those localization are being set by the government. The developers at Microsoft on each region are responsible to turn those on or off. Via the code, they look at the country code. Let's say you consider old superpowers like France or UK. They had so many colonies. Their financial system still is relying on those countries, even though those countries now are independent. Certain North African countries or perhaps Caribbean countries, they are still following European systems like Senegal, like Djibouti. They are still based on France regulatory, but they are independent countries. You see them here? Do you see Senegal? Not really. But you do see it when you create a legal entity. The localization make it continuous and allow to change the number to a higher or lower number if they are available. They have not been used. As a best practice, if you're dealing with external documents such as vendor invoices, purchase orders, anything gets out of your company, always choose continuous. If it's internal for performance reasons, don't use continuous. But it doesn't hurt to make it continuous if it's a small business or mid-size. As you notice here on the cleanup, if it is continuous, system automatically every 24 hours cleans up unused system, unused numbers, and puts it back into circulations. You can change that if you want. You could change it to be every 2 hours. But if it is not continuous, that doesn't make any sense, does it? It's not continuous. Why should you be worried about gaps? If you do turn it on, however, by default is every 24 hours, usually at midnight, based on a time zone that we set up on the company. If I don't make it to be continuous, again, this is not going to be cleaned up. There is a feature also, they call it a manual cleanup. If you say all, this is going to clean up all the number sequences. You only do this if you're a system administrator and something dramatically has happened, such as like overtime, could be extra earning. For the sake of discussion, I'm choosing procurement and internal control. And while we're at it, by the way, you see there's a fast tab. They call it allowed organizational type. That means any of these nodes can be available or be included in that hierarchy that we would like to add in here. Whereas some of them that must have only legal entity. As soon as you add another node, you cannot use it as a hierarchy. It's not going to be even been shown. Or on the project, for example, it says legal entity or business unit. Look, nothing. I have no organizational hierarchy that has only either legal entity or business unit. But look, if I go back to the procurement internal control, I can add any of the following because they have almost any of these nodes in them. I'm going to choose CRS retailers here and click OK. Now, we go ahead and assign the purpose for this organizational hierarchy, and we have already published it. Let's wrap up our conversation and see the whole purpose in regard to the hierarchy. And even though I have not set up the finance at all and supply chain, but I can set up the policy. Let's go to the procurement and sourcing. And under procurement and sourcing, there's a section called policies. And here, called purchasing policies. These are all shared master data across legal entities. Now, then I add another segment, let's say, and happens that the main account in the structure requires to be there. Let's say I pick and choose the main account as another segment here too. But unlike the department, the main account cannot have a blank value because you have to have a value in order to be able to post it. Now, let's say I like to move this main account to the other side. So in order to do this, I can actually select the segment action and move the main account to the left or to the right. It will actually move them for me if I want to. If you take a look at the department, I make this to have a blank value for me. Let's go ahead and add another segment here, perhaps the cost center maybe. These are the dimensions that are available. And as a matter of fact, how do I get these dimensions? By going through the general ledger. These are all shared data. Even though I'm in USMF, you can get the same thing. If I go to the dimension, these are the financial dimensions that are available for you. And these financial dimensions are shared across legal entities, so you can use them. The financial dimension ideology is having the capability to break down the monetary value into more granular detail. And you can actually create a financial dimension set set off of it in order to be able to properly report based on a combination of different dimensions. If you are a developer or if you are working with a developer, you can create your own custom financial dimensions and bring it over here. However, Microsoft, starting from X version 2012, has given you the capability to not to be worried about being a developer. You could have a common ground in order to create a custom dimension right off of here. The difference between them is that the custom dimension goes to a specific table. But if you like to have your own custom table separate from the rest of it, the developer has to convert a view into a financial dimension. Development training talks about those things. Now here also you have the capability to create a new financial dimension right within the account structure form. That gives flexibility. If I add a segment now, it's going to say, would you like to add any additional financial dimension that you don't see? You could if you wanted it to, or you could create a custom dimension. Let's say Seahorse Retailers has a very specific requirements to have a dimension named US Logistics. Why? They're in Ireland, but they would like to report to the United States. That's the storytelling. We wanted to know that the U.S. operation is going to be based on a West, East, or Central, and the effects of the financial transaction from Ireland is going to affect which side of the U.S., let's say. We started with the voucher transactions and voucher templates. Now let's wrap up our conversation with that. Now in this scenario, to begin with, one more time, I do a validation. It was $100,000 discrepancies. I'm going to change it to 240 and I'm going to do a validation. So you're going to be fine. Now the voucher is okay. But now let's talk about the voucher template as type %. If you recall, when you had one line, whatever amount you put in is going to place in the same amount. But this time, I'm going to go to the voucher template and I'm going to save this, no matter which line, by the way. They're all the same voucher. To prove the concept, if I do a drop down, it's going to go voucher number 4. That means it's already balanced. I'm not going to continue with that, but who said you have to have 3 lines? You could have as many lines as you want, as long as the voucher is balanced. If I go create a brand new one, I need to demo this properly. I create a template as type %, but this time I'm going to use this specific template, which is the third one. That's the second voucher, which happens to be number 3. The first one was number 1, if you recall. In this one, if I click OK, it's going to say how much. I intentionally put in $100 for you to prove the concept. When I click OK, system break it off properly based on a proportion. Therefore, the $500,000 is going to have 52% here and 48% here. So nicely, you can figure it out exactly how the percent breaks it off. You won't be able to see the effect of voucher template as type % unless you have multiple lines. Otherwise, it's always 100%. As you notice, the voucher number here is coming from the journal name. So let me explain that again. If I go back here and take a look at the Jan, for simplicity, as you notice also, at the bottom of it, Microsoft has brought in so many different errors that you can leverage and understand how to work with it. But depending on the template, you may have multiple tasks and multiple approval operation. Happens that in this specific template, you have only approved daily journal. So if I drag and drop it in here, automatically there are more errors will be added here. The catch here is, this is like a canvas that you have to connect the dots literally. You start from a point and then you have to approve it, and at the end, you got to end it. Therefore, in this scenario, what I like to do is just connect the dots, and as you see, many of the errors are gone. Now, if you're not familiar where to go and what to set, all you need to do, double click on one of these errors, automatically brings up the form that requires your attention. Somebody has to deal with this workflow. So who is the person who is supposed to be assigned to this workflow? Is that a participant? Is that security or role-based? Is the person is part of a hierarchy selection? Is that private for that user? Is that like based on a managerial hierarchy? Like remember the organizational hierarchy based on an organizational chart? Workflow user, the person who originates it, the person who owns the workflow, the person who uses the workflow, or old-fashioned way, just the typical users in the system. For simplicity, I use admin, and in future, I'm going to show you multiple users when it comes to budgeting. Now, as you notice, the next error, it appears right here on the bar. It's just telling me that you must enter a message. That's where I told you, if you do have literally other languages, you have to have translation for that language, otherwise it wouldn't work. So if the end user uses the English US, workflows are designed based on English US if you have a text. This gets defaulted to the language of your choice. So if, let's say, in Seahorse Retailers, I would have used English Irish, this would have told me put the English Irish text. But for existing workflows, the text is in English, so you have to have a translation based on the language of that user. So this gives you lots of benefit. To begin with, I can specify a placeholder here. And this placeholder, there are values of a field. And beautifully, you can concatenate your message with the placeholder. So let's do this. I say approval of Department 024, which happens to be finance. And I would like to request the amount of $1,000. As soon as I save this, you notice that the budget check result is going to have a green circle with a white check mark on it. If that appears, that means your budget control works fine and is looking at that specific account and is going to monitor it. However, I cannot select update budget balances because this specific budget model and this budget code requires a workflow. Therefore, I need to submit this workflow. I did not define the workflow. I didn't create it. I am reusing an organizational-wide workflow. I submit this, and now I can view the history of this workflow to see who is going to get it. If I refresh this, you notice that the status is set to pending and my user has an affiliation with this employee and I've submitted this. I wait a few seconds and I refresh it and it's going to tell me exactly who is going to get this work item because I didn't create this workflow. I don't know who the person is that is supposed to approve my budget. I'm going to refresh this and after a couple of minutes the name will appear here. As you see, the approval got started. Now as you notice, Brad Sutton happens to be the budget manager. You have two choices. Either you log off and log on as Brad, or let's assume Brad is out today and I'd like to reassign it to somebody else. In order to continue with my demonstration, I assign it to myself and I click reassign and I refresh. This now got assigned to me. I'm going to carry on and I act as Brad and I go to the comment and I go to the work item